clarify if this is a webinar, what a pivot table is, because not everybody knows what it is, and we stepped over it very quickly.
Oh, sorry, yeah. So pivot tables are, it's a function in Excel basically to analyze large data sets. So if you have a large data set, you can use a pivot table to quickly do analysis. For example, if you have
get a cross check.
Yeah. So we have a pivot table. So we have a large data set here. So we have all kinds of data on reliability, on functionality, on crowding, and we have that for all kinds of districts in regions. So then, if we select that, we make a pivot table of that. We can show you. So then we can make a table easily of how many in total of that entire data set, how many systems are functioning in the different districts.
It's grouping, basically.
It's basically, yeah, it's a tool to group data results, and in that way to make data analysis a lot easier.
You don't have to select your columns. It's just it recognizes and relates them.
Yeah. So for example, like here, let me see. So here is all the data that is under this pivot table. So this pivot table shows in the columns the different levels of functionality. So functioning, partially functioning, non-functioning, and in the rows it puts the different districts. Different districts, and then it puts here in the values the counts of the number of different levels of functionalities. So instead of functionality, I can also make that reliability, for example. And then we have a pivot table of the different levels of reliability of the different districts. So it's a tool. Yeah.
Okay. Other questions?
Yes, please. Can I ask two questions?
Yeah.
The first one is that I went, of course, to the link of Google Maps, and for some reason, I see the legend, I see the symbols, but the symbols do not have colors. Have you had that problem elsewhere before?
Yeah. Just click on Earth instead of map, Peter.
Okay. And the second one, the evaluation, the last slide, all very positive, great. Maybe next time we can have some kind of a SWOT so that we also see the risks, threats, problems. Very few weaknesses mentioned yet.
Yeah.
But maybe on top of your head, are there any limitations that you have encountered so far to immediately respond to Peter's question?
Yeah, of course. I mean, if we would do something like a SWOT, this would be the strengths. I think it shows our own excitement that we've done it this way. But that said, in terms of weakness, I mean, we were looking specifically at mobile tech here, so not specifically at flow, because there may be weaknesses also to do with flow, which have to do with it being a beta tool. But in terms of the mobile data collection, clearly you have to think about things like online, connectivity and the cost related to that, and you have to also, so you basically have to start budgeting for some things that you may not have budgeted for before, and that's also a threat.
But you don't have to budget for data entry.
You don't have to budget for data entry, but if you would think about scaling this, for example, then a lot of times a lot of data collection is budgeted as a one-time activity, but as a regular activity, then you would have to start putting these budget lines in there, and we can't take it for granted that people will definitely do that. We have to make sure that that happens, and so we're starting to learn something about how much it costs. I think another thing that's worth mentioning is that in some cases it may not lower overall costs, let's say for a one-time exercise. It's really, I think it's going to be, as long as there's repeat data collection, we can really start seeing the benefits You know, I mean, at one time you have to buy the device, you have to train people on how to use the device, you have to make sure that there are people in the country who can troubleshoot, you know, the problem. For example, if it's us who bring certain devices to Ghana, then we can't take for granted that people will be able to solve all their problems in the field. So, and I think, you know, there were, you know, to me, maybe one of the biggest risks or is, you know, if you have a lack of technical capacity to actually know how to troubleshoot problems. I think the technology works great. You know, there's a lot of ways you can take advantage of this kind of instant, near real-time data collection. But if, for example, your data gets stuck on the phone and you don't know why, you know, how do you solve the problem? You know, is it your internet connection that's broken? Is it your memory card that's full? You know, these were the kinds of problems we ran into in the field, real problems, you know, that we could solve, but because we had some technical capacity. So you really have to look, you know, very clearly at the technical capacity that's available in any agency that wants to roll this out and ensure that it's there one way or the other.
Yeah, and ideally you'd have, you need quite a good and strong internet connection in order to have access to the data to generate the raw data reports, which at the moment is still a bit of a problem at district level, but that's something that is developing quite fast in Ghana. So yeah, but it is at least at the moment definitely still one of the big challenges.
Yeah.
I was just thinking, would basically using that kind of technology limits the number of data that you can collect, number of data points, because basically you have one person on the ground, while if you, for example, use a paper-based, which anybody can do almost, you would have more data entry points. Or was that important in this case?
Well, I think anyone, to be honest, I think a paper-based survey might be more difficult than a phone-based survey, because the phone-based survey, the way of operating it, it has a logic. So the questions are dependent on each other, so to speak. So unlike a paper questionnaire, where you have to find out the dependency of the questions yourself, that's automated in the mobile phone questionnaire, so to speak. So as long as you have a phone, the amount of people that can do the number of enumerators is, yeah, it depends on the number of phones, so to speak. That's the limiting factor.
Well, yeah, I mean,
and you won't give it to anybody, I suppose, because the phone itself costs some fee. For example, would you use volunteers for data collection of that kind?
Within a district, there's people who are supposed to be responsible for this kind of data collection already. There are environmental health assistants, which are part of the local government, who are supposed to do this kind of monitoring, who are supposed to go to communities to collect data, but also to do, how do you call it, animation and things like that. So we, as much as possible, use them. So we don't want to use volunteers because we don't want to have it as a once-off kind of activity. We want to have it as a structural, continuous activity. So we tried as much as possible to use the systems, the structures that are already in place.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the only thing I would add to that point is that we did think about the possibility of, for example, printing out some extra sheets and, you know, going out with them. But a lot of but I mean, what we like about using the phone for data collection is that you can kind of control the type of input you get, and you get a little more feedback than you would get from a paper survey. So it is possible to do that. And just to mention, CREPA has also done some data collection in Ghana using flow phones, and they did use sort of volunteers. They weren't volunteers, in fact they were paid, but they did use, you know, young guys from different districts, you know, who kind of were familiar with phones, and they quickly collected a lot of baseline data. But again, you know, sustainability of that data collection is the issue.
Yeah, because, yeah, can you please wind up, then we go to the next one.
Oh, they're very small, and don't underestimate. I mean, in Ghana, like loads and loads of people have smartphones already.
Okay.
Mobile phone technology is not something new. Yeah.
Okay, we got two questions on Skype, René and Patrick. René, you want to go first, and then we go to Jo and to Harry.
Yeah, okay, so this is René from IRC Uganda. First of all, I would like to thank Marieke and Marieke for this nice presentation. My question is related to how you are coming to the score of the QAS scoring tables. Maybe I missed a little bit because I joined a bit after 50 minutes only, but if you take your example of the Watson committee, so is it, how do you come to the score of 25? Because I assume you have different data entry on the different elements of your scenario, and then you somehow aggregate that and you come to a score of 25 or 50 or 75. Can you explain a little bit how you do that?
You mean as soon as you have the data, how do you come to the score?
No, what is the algorithm that brings you to the score? You showed that in the other presentation the other day.
I don't have it here. Yeah, I can't put it up very fast. But basically, for each of the questions, we made a logic. How do you call that? A flow chart, so to speak. I'll very quickly put it up. So so basically 50 is the benchmark, which means that it's more or less in line with the minimum the minimum things that should be in place. 25 is when not everything is in place, when there's some certain things not in place, and 100 is the ideal, so to speak. So for each, so we've identified questions, and then based on the questions, we've come up with logics. So the scoring tables are the starting point. From that we develop the questions, and then in order to facilitate the scoring, for each of the indicators we've developed a scoring logic, so to speak. So that means if, for example, for the first question, is there a Watson committee? If it says no, then the score becomes 0. If it is yes, then you go to the other questions, and then you look, is there at least 30% of the Watson members, are they women? Is there separate cashier and caretaker functions? Are there vendors? If no, then they score 25. If yes, you go to the next questions. So that's how we've come up with a logic for each of those for those indicators. So that based on the answers of the different questions, the scores can automatically be generated. So actually, we started with asking the enumerators to do the scoring themselves manually based on the flowchart. But actually later we decided to automate that by putting in formulas into Excel. So based on the answers in the Excel chart, so to speak, based on the raw data, we can generate automatically the scores. Is that clear?
No, I think it's clear. I would like to see it once a little bit more detail, because I think it's very interesting that, of course, it's a bit different use of the QAS methodology, I think. And you replace a bit of the perception of stakeholders, how they do their own scoring, or maybe sometimes by an outsider, by a kind of logic.
No, that's true. Yeah, it's just to making sure that when we have big data sets, we can easily generate scores. So you're right, the perception of stakeholders comes a bit less in play, and it's more about the logic.
Okay. Patrick was the next in line with a question.
Hi, sorry, that was just me trying to switch on my microphone again. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, it was just, it wasn't so much a question as a comment on the whole expenses question. I mean, there was Katerina who said that we
basically managed to do as much data collection in a couple of months using this technology as we did in a year using paper-based technology for wash cost, and that's because of the whole speed, the increased speed at which data was coming from the field and we could quality control and stuff. So, I mean, yes, of course, you know, buying the phone is a small additional cost compared to buying it printing out forms, but the huge saving is in getting the data entered, and which of course stops somebody else in front of a computer and typing it manually as well, or from paper forms. So I would even question what Nick said, that in the free you won't cover your costs in the first round. I think you do.
Okay, but I assume that you guys will come up with some hard figures on all the costs and so on. Okay, then we will first with Jo, then Harry, and then Søren.
Okay, I hope people can understand me far away. My experience from Uganda is that district staff have sometimes a reason why to underreport or overreport on the situation. And when they underreport, they expect more funding for the coming year. So that's an important element, because I think you will use your monitoring data for that kind of things. And the people that you're using for the data collection are from the district. So what is the reliability issue? How do you ensure the reliability of your data? Are there definitions? I came in a bit late, so I think with this kind of QIS, you may overcome that. They still may score yes, while it is no, of course. You don't know that. So what are you using definitions? That's one. And are you using triangulation in your questionnaire? And how do you, with your database, use that triangulation? Is there a kind of an alarm, an alert that says it was yes there and it is no there, and that puts you on an alert basis, and that you say the reliability is at stake?
Okay, well, go ahead.
Well, for the first question, the reliability of the data, I think as much as possible we've tried to have definitions. For example, functionality, we're defining by doing two little tests. A stroke test, number of strokes it takes to fill a bucket, and a leakage test. You let it rest for a bit and then you start pumping again and see whether it works. So by having those kind of tests and those kind of definitions, we try to make it as reliable as possible. But of course they can always cheat, so to speak. They can always put in wrong data. But I don't think the mobile phone technology helps or prevents or helps it, so to speak. I mean, it's that you will have, whether you have a paper questionnaire or whether you have mobile phone technology. That depends a bit on the honesty, on the questions, but also on the honesty of the enumerators, obviously. Related to triangulation, there's not that much, because we try to keep the number of questions to the bare minimum, so to speak, to the real bare necessities. So there's not that much triangulation. There are some things, but not that much of it.
Yeah, I think our focus initially was really on the ease of the data collection. I mean, I was wondering about the same thing. Should we put more triangulation in the beginning? But in the end, we felt, it would be better to just make sure that this exercise can roll out quickly and easily, and that there's repeat data collection, because in the end, by collecting information over time, it becomes also a way to triangulate and also a way to check the reliability of information. Of course, you can always send a third party, and do a sample-based data collection to see whether there's, some odd things going on. That at least systematic ones you'd be able to see. So I think the focus was more on that. Of course, there's all kinds of things around motivation and local governance issues, and I would also point out that although with the phone, for example, we ask people to take pictures and to make GPS coordinates. So in one way that helps us also know, when they say, are there records or are there not records, you can see it on the picture. On the other hand, you know, if they can also take a picture of something else. They can also choose not to take a picture. You know, they could also do a GPS coordinate somewhere and then go home and then fill out the rest of the survey. You know, so there's always a lot of ways of cheating the system, and I think once you work with a phone as much as they do, you've probably figured them out.
You can actually track what they do on the GPS. That's what we did in Malawi sometimes, and found some enumerators around the kind of bottle stores instead of in
That's a good triangulation.
There may be some privacy concerns there.
Okay, we have 2 more questions, and I think we are running out of time, so I'd like to give the questions.
I have 2, but they're very short. So that's the first one. You mentioned you need internet connection. Do you need a connection all the time, or can you just upload the survey and then, without any connection, go to different spots, do the survey, and afterwards upload them all?
Yeah. No, you don't need an internet connection to do the actual data collection. You do need an internet connection to upload the information. There are other ways. You can export the information from the phone, put it on a computer, put it on a, you know, whatever, some kind of USB drive, but in the end, you have to bring it somewhere where there's an internet connection.
You don't need internet connection on all the different spots?
No, no. And then pretty much even if you have an intermittent connection, as far as uploading the surveys, it will just keep retrying.
Last question for us.
Yeah, okay, very quick one. One is a recommendation, 2 quick questions. Based on my ignorance of what IRC has been doing these last years in Ghana, and we have been doing many things. And it's my first day here. As I said, if this is supposed to go on the web, I would like to suggest that you need to have at least 2-3 slides at the introduction for people to, you know, introduce them to water sanitation data in Ghana while you're doing this. Otherwise, because you jump right into the topic, and as an outsider, you wouldn't be able to understand what you're presenting here. So that's my recommendation. My questions are, you know, there's some kind of a global open data movement, and which I believe in Africa, as far as I know, is pretty much led by Kenya, with the Kenyan government having opened up a lot of governmental data and putting them online for matters of transparency, and with support of, I think, the Google Foundation. They recently launched Maji Data, with Maji being the Kiswahili word for water, so it's a water data portal. I find this very interesting, so my question is, how big, or how do you see the potential for data like this being taken up into, I think you mentioned dimes, taken up into a national kind of data monitoring system, technically or technologically speaking? And number 2, more because I think data is part of evidence, and what people want in a way for things to change is to put pressure on the government, to put money into sectors where it lacks. So how do you see the potential of this data combined with pictures, which is also evidence, to actually put pressure on the Ghanaian government in this case, to show that the evidence is here. People are taking these pictures, people are collecting the data, and they're online. You can't say the situation is not as we know it is. So, you know, I'm trying to get more from the data kind of research to the uptake in policy making and decision makers. How do you see this in the Ghanaian situation?
Well, I mean, yeah. So Kenya, as far as I know, is leading.
Yes, it is.
And you know, they've got an interesting portal online. In terms, technically speaking, yes, it can be. I mean, we can put this information, for example, in a similar portal, and it wouldn't be too hard either to do it in a dynamic way or to do it just periodically, put up the information. I think the bigger question is there a willingness, you know, to create a similar portal, you know, for this kind of information online? And our initial goal, I think, is pretty much to work with, you know, the local agencies who are, you know, meant to be helping facilitate water supply and are involved in monitoring water supply and ensuring, first of all, that the quality of information there is improved. And yes, we would like it to be linked to a national system, but that also has to do with how the national system develops and excuse me, develops in the future. Right now, for example, it's not an online technology, so you know it's more of an access database, which is then distributed into different districts, and it is rather difficult. Well, from an outside perspective, it's difficult to manage. I think, you know, technologies like Flow offer a way of maybe linking some of these things together, but eventually there'll need to be an update.
Yeah, for the use of the data for like policy making and things. In two of the pilot districts where the data has been collected, the data has been presented, analysis has been presented to the district assembly, and that they reacted quite enthusiastically. They were saying, as far as I know, because I wasn't there, but what they reported back was they kind of know what's the status and what's happening, but they don't have the evidence. So it's very difficult for them to say to NGOs, to donors, etc., like, okay, now this is where we need this, and this is where. So, and this gives them the evidence. That's what they were saying as well. Like, this gives us, the data we need in order to illustrate what we actually already know a bit. So, but so definitely that's it's a very important thing at district level, and that for now we have it at the 3 districts. If we have more of that information, if it's more how do you call it, representative for the rest of the country, for regions, then you can also start talking about it at regional and national level.
Okay. I would like to thank you all. I think time is running out. We need to go back to our desks. I'd like to thank Nick and Marieke for this very nice presentation. I also like to thank Joanna and Petra, who have helped in setting up some of the technicalities of this first attempt to move towards webinars. I hope the movies, the flips will be available soon on the portal page together with the presentation, so that others can enjoy it. And yeah, I hope for the next meeting we may have added bits and pieces to the technicalities and the functioning of this kind of webinar. So bear with us as we improve along the way. And the next one is, I think, the first Wednesday of March, and the exact date is the 7th of March, where Emma will present some of the results of the policy formulation support in Honduras. So you're all welcome and invited to join in that, and I hope we have as good as a turnout here, but hopefully also online as we have today. Thank you very much.